Thank you for staying with us. The second part of our episode, the second topic, as we promised you, we will be talking about the who is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. We don't want to take too much time from our dear guest, Egyptologist Samir Abbass, because he knows much more than we do about this, obviously. Mr. Abbass, thank you very much for joining us. It's a question that has crossed the mind, I guess, of each and every one of us. Who is the Pharaoh of the Exodus? Who is the Pharaoh that was in the time of Prophet Moses, peace be upon him?
Thank you, Mr. Muhammad, for this rich and exciting introduction you made. That's a very important subject, as you mentioned. Before we start on the subject, I just need to remind our audience that's another episode of a series we have, which is Mysteries of Ancient Egypt. Yes. We started like episode number 5 so far, which is talking about who is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. So the reason why this subject is extremely important, because it touches many beliefs and many faiths. If you are Muslims, Christian, Jewish, it's important for you. So that was mentioned in the Old Testaments, that's where the Jewish and Muslims believe in, and that is mentioned in the Holy Book, the Quran as well. So in the Old Testaments, as Christians and Jews actually introduced, that is the icon of the stories of the Old Testaments. The most important story which is mentioned in the book of Exodus in the Old Testament. For Muslims, there is the most told story.
Yes,
which is
Quran,
spread
yes.
in the Quran,
Sure.
which is spread almost actually in 20 different surahs or chapters of the Quran. So that's one of the reasons why it is very important. So another reason, because it touches Egypt and the history of Egypt as well. So especially that it's also deals with a very sensitive topic, which is, we will talk about that from religious and historical point of view today, which is about the Arab-Israeli conflicts. So in the Pharaoh of the Exodus is still an early to know, or we don't have enough evidence to say that who's exact person. So what we are trying to find is the most person which can fit in the story. But it seems that it is very obvious that in the Quran, in the Old Testaments, the Pharaoh name is not mentioned. So just the title. The Pharaoh is a title, not the name, and which
opens up a new theory that it could be more than one, not just one
exactly.
Pharaoh.
So
that theory also, but that theory as well cannot be confirmed, right? I mean, it's also
from
not
my
100%.
personal reading, there is nothing can be confirmed.
Right.
Now. And it seemed that it was the God.
That's history,
it was the God will that nobody knows the exact Pharaoh of the Exodus, because if God wants us to know that there is other names has been mentioned in this story except the Pharaoh itself. So that we will cover in the conclusion. Why we don't have
Pharaoh
the exact.
Drowned, right?
Yes, we are talking about the Pharaoh which is drowned on the Red Sea or the Red Sea.
And did
That's
they
another.
find,
That's
did we
another.
find his body?
That's another debating subject, because if we believe that it is Ramesses II or Miriam Betah or Seti II or Amenhotep II, yes, we found his body. His body is mummified and in display in the Egyptian museum.
The ayah in the Holy Quran which says
we will save his body.
Right.
So we'll save his body. So it is a quite interesting subject here. So to start this subject, we need to look at the historical period. So when that happens. And that will open another big debate,
yes.
So there was different theories about when these incidents happens. But the good thing that we had a very important reference especially in the Old Testaments, which is tell us the location, the city where things happens.
Yes.
So that's a very good timing actually for introducing this picture, because they are dealing with a city in the northeast of Cairo, on the east of the delta, which is today called the San al-Hagar, and that was the ancient capital one day of Egypt, which is in the ancient times
that's
known
in
as
Sharia?
Tanis, exactly, Sharia. So Per Ramessu or Per Ramesses, that was the city which is mentioned in the Old Testaments, where Moses lived and where the Pharaoh lived as well. So now we know at least it should be like 1400, 1300 BC, 3,300 years ago, because before Ramesses I, we have no evidence. We have no evidence that this city was exist. That's another picture which is showing the possible crossing location, which is, we'll talk about that later on. But going back to the main topic, the city.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing that there was in 1986, Manfred Bittak, Austrian archaeologist, he made an excavations around Tanis, and he was attracted by a piece of a stone, which is actually a prototype in the diagrams I have, which is showing a field, right, and there is a pedestal with the foot of the King Ramses II, Colossus of Ramses II there. So that was 30 kilometers away from Tanis, and that was the location of Per Ramesu back in the ancient times, so which is not far away from the location where Tanis or Son today. So which is mean that, so that is something which is confirm what we have in the Old Testament, that we know the location where the incident happens. And since it was named after Ramses I, so we know that it should be happens, or the Pharaoh should be one of the kings who ruled Egypt after Ramses I. So we are talking about king who ruled Egypt in the 19th dynasty onwards, not before. So because there is
that is confirmed. That we can confirm.
You know, so because we have the name of the city, Per Ramesses or Per Ramesu, and the city already has been found, the blocks and the name of the city is written on it. So
we have a reference, the 19th, from the 19th dynasty on, after Ramses I.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
I'm just repeating what you said, so it will be...
remember that. So before finding, that was like a kind of a new discovery, like 1986 is like a new discovery. So before that, there was many other theories. And these theories has been printed and documented in books, is still around so far. And there is still scholars which is believe in the old theory, and they find a problem to update their knowledge and based on the new theory. So that is the first key point, which is we had to sort our dispute today about the Pharaoh of the Exodus. The second one is it only one Pharaoh, or we are dealing with more than one Pharaoh? So Moses, from the Old Testament perspective, is lived for nearly 150 years. And we don't have a Pharaoh in ancient Egypt ruled for 150 years.
But do we know at which age he became prophet? Or that wouldn't make a difference, right? Yeah, because if he lived for 150, because he was born in the era of Pharaoh I.
Exactly. So we will. So the longest.
And it could be Pharaoh I, and it could be the one and only, and it could be more than.
So the longest reign Pharaoh in ancient Egyptian history is Pipi II, 90 years. He ruled for 90 years. So that's a good actually photograph of Meren Betah. So Meren Betah, his mummy in the Egyptian Museum, and Meren Betah is one of the candidates of the pharaohs of the. A very important reason. Or actually reasons. So one of them.
That's his body. It's almost.
You know, have you noticed something which is unusual in his body? So if you looked at the mummies of the ancient Egyptian mummies and compare that with his mummy, so his skin slightly whiter than normal, and that's, some believe that because he drowned in the Red Sea and with the salt, and that makes his body actually more like, looks like white in color than the regular. So this tablet, which is also named after him, the tablet of Meren Betah, which is, it talks about his military achievements. It actually is in one of the hidden corner of the Egyptian Museum. So the interesting thing about this tablet, that it is the only tablet or the only record in Egyptian history which is mentioned the word Isra-Ra, which is understood as Israel. And he talks about that he took them down and he defeated them and he kicked them out and all of that. So there's still another debate. If Isra-Ra, which is in this tablet, is referred to Israel, because the problem that we don't have any reference apart from this tablet that's mentioning the word Israel or Moses in the ancient Egyptian text, which is make it very, very difficult for us. So, and that's why some of the early archaeologists, which is they were dying to find an evidence of the Pharaoh of the Exodus, they took that as an evidence and they declared that Meren Betah is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. So, it's still debatable actually.
Any other candidates?
Yes. You know, so as I mentioned earlier, we are not dealing with only one Pharaoh.
Ramses II, Meren Betah.
Okay, so I think that Ramses II, it might be the Pharaoh, which is where Moses has been born. For a very simple, but it is difficult to believe that Ramses II, as most of the people believe that he is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. First, we need to understand why many believes in Ramses II is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, because he's a very famous Pharaoh first of all, because the location where Moses lived and the Pharaoh lived is known as Per Ramessu or Per Ramesses, and which is literally means the house of. And since Ramses is the most famous Pharaoh, so people think that he's Ramses II. But looking at the life and the achievements of Ramses II, so we will find that Ramses II, he is the most king documented in Egyptian monuments, in Egyptian temples. He left a countless numbers of buildings behind. So comparing that with the story of Moses and the plagues and the economical disasters which happens in Egypt because of the plagues, it is difficult that Egypt was already suffered from plagues and suffered from economical disasters, and Ramses will have the money to build all of these temples. So we are looking for a king which is he was bankrupted. He didn't have much wealth to build things. Not only so, Ramses II, he died of an old age. We have his mummy in the Egyptian Museum. He ruled Egypt for 67 years, and he died in the age of 99. So according to the story, the Pharaoh of the Exodus, he chased the Israelites. It doesn't make sense, 94 years old man to jump in his chariots and drive his army to chase the Israelites. It doesn't make sense.
Mr. Samir, can you tell us more about the crossing place and the land of Madian?
Okay, that's a very good point. Thanks for pointing that. You know, so I wish we can come to some of the illustrations which showing the northeast of Egypt and showing some, like especially focusing on the Red Sea area.
Yeah, if we can see the maps, if we can see the map again, the pictures again, especially the last maps. Yes, Mr. Abbass.
So in old versions of the Old Testaments, it's saying that, you know, so that's the map actually, which is showing the location where the incident started. But actually, like other illustrations, which comes after that, will show like a focus on the northeast part of Egypt. And yes, that is the perfect. Let's keep this map for some time. So, the problem is the Old Testaments was translated by people or translators. They are not familiar with the ancient Egyptian language. In the original text, which is that's before being translated actually into English and into Greek as well. So there is a word, the word which is described the location of the crossing place, Pa-Yam. Pa-Yam in ancient Egypt means it could be applied to the sea, it could be applied to a lake with reeds, it could be applied to the Nile River during the flood time. All that is called in the ancient Egyptian terminology language is called yam, or yam. So the problem that is wrongly translated into the Red Sea, R-E-D, Red Sea, and that's why it became a tradition to believe that the crossing location is the Red Sea. While in the new translation that was fixed, in the new translation of the Old Testaments, in the New International Version, for example, it's saying Reed Sea with 2 E, and that's a very big difference between Red Sea and Reed Sea. So still, the crossing location is still a matter of debate. If it happens on the Gulf of Suez, where Ayun Musa or Musa Springs today, that's one of the attractions on possibly the route of Moses, or it happens in one of the lakes to the north of the Gulf of Suez, that's another location, or it happens in one of the lakes which is in the very north by the Mediterranean Sea, or it happens by the Nile River or one of the branches of Nile River, or the fifth location, which is not very clear on the map here, that is based on a very new theory. The crossing location might happen in the Gulf of Aqaba. And that will open a completely different subject. That means that the wandering place or the wandering land, which is where the Israelites wander for 40 years, is not Sinai, is Saudi Arabia, the northwest of Saudi Arabia. That's the brand new theory about that. And based on some excavations happens by some archaeologists there, which is briefly because there was they were like there needs more permissions and more time. They said that they found evidence that the early Israelites, they lived there and they worshipped the golden calf, which is mean that the Mount of Moses, it should be there. But from our tradition today, Moses Mountain,
Sinai.
Exactly. Lives in Sinai, and that's why telling you that's a very debating subject now.
Tur Sinai.
Tur Sinai, or more specific, the mountain behind St. Catherine Monastery in the heart of South Sinai. So that's from traditional point of view. That's where Moses received the 10 Commandments. I have my personal bias when it comes to this story. I love Moses Mountain. I cannot imagine how many times I hiked the mountain. I went up there and Sandcastle Mountain and visited the monastery. Is a place which has had a...
You're making us start that.
Okay.
Because I haven't been there.
So it's really a very beautiful, peaceful, spiritual place. But the main idea, the main reason, the philosophy behind the story is that the mountain or the story, and what's called the ethics or the benefit of the story. So I think that God's points in this story is not particular locations. No, that was the Ten Commandments itself. Whatever it was delivered, if it was in the mountain behind St. Catherine, or the mountain in the northwest of Saudi Arabia, or in the mountains in Wadi Firan, because that's another suggestion as well, like a mountain along Wadi Firan. So that's not the main point. The main point is the Ten Commandments itself. So the mountain here is an idol, is not the important part of the story. And I think that for the same reason why God did not mention the name of the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh itself is not the important part of the story. The Pharaoh is an example for every tyrant.
I know that this question is not directly involved to what we're discussing today, but it's still you as an Egyptologist, you must be some sort of historian as well. So also questions that came to the mind of many people, other than who is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, or where was the mountain where Prophet Musa received the Ten Commandments, is where did Adam land on earth, and about Noah's Noah's Ark.
I will tell you,
and where did Noah
I will tell you an interesting story.
I'm sure that you have also something to tell us about that.
I will tell you an interesting story about that. So have you been to Ibn Tulun Mosque?
Yes.
Okay, so there is a small museum next to Ibn Tulun Mosque which has some relics, documents the history of Ibn Tulun Mosque, known as Ger Anderson. So there was a legend about Ibn Tulun Mosque because it was built on a high ground. That is the landing place of the Ark of Noah, and that is the mountain where Moses received the Ten Commandments. Not only. So if we made to old Cairo, Coptic Cairo, there is a synagogue there, which is Ben Ezra synagogue, which is one of the oldest synagogues in Egypt. When you go there, according to the guidebook, so there is a memorial there which is marking from their perspective the location where Moses received the Ten Commandments. So it seems that the story is sells very well, and the story which is used by different people in different historical periods in order to give importance for their buildings and for their communities and to give them historical rights in particular locations. But dealing with science, it is impossible to be in that location because we already found the location of Per Ramasu, which is mentioned in the Old Testament. So which is and that is our main reference. Our main problem in this situation is we have any Egyptian records. The ancient Egyptian civilization, the ancient Egyptian kings, scribes, historians, they documented the ancient Egyptian civilization very well.
From what you read about, and I'm sure you read that, do you have any theories regarding the place of where Noah landed? Prophet Noah landed, or Adam even landed on it?
Personally, no, I haven't made a research about that, but it came across me that there is different theories about where Adam and where Noah, and it is very obvious for me that it was an attempt by people just to claim to grab the important attention.
What about the Jewish wall? Have you read anything about it, or can?
The problem with all of these actually stories is, I don't think that it was God's intention to mark this location. So because we are dealing, if it is God's intention to deal with the location, God was very specific.
Made it clear
very specific about some important places like Jerusalem, like Mecca. So that's where Jesus lived. That's where the transfigurations of Muhammad happens. That's where Adam, and that's where the Ishmael and Abraham, which is built the holy place. So because that's what God wants us to know about the religious importance of this location. But other things No, it seemed that it wasn't God's intentions to make us out, to make us know. And that we are facing another problem with the documented history of ancient Egypt. We cannot find any evidence of the ancient Egyptian history about Moses, about Joseph, about Abraham, about any of these biblical prophets. Simply,
but it is said that Prophet Joseph, was in Sharia as well. Was in
that will be open a completely different subject, which is
Sinai.
we might cover that in a different episode because that could be possibly around the Fayoum area as well.
Yeah,
that could be, that's another story. So, but in
and the Qarun
and Qarun Lake. Okay, so the point is the ancient Egyptians, they were biased to their own history. So you never heard about from the ancient Egyptian record that we lost a battle, for example. And for 3,000 years of civilization, it happens that we lost like a couple of battles, for sure. But the ancient Egyptians, they never talk about their setbacks. And Musa's story is one of the setbacks of the ancient Egyptians, and that's why, in purpose, is not mentioned in their records. I can understand why. So even the miracles, that's another interesting story, the miracles which has been sent. So let's go back to the Pharaoh of the Exodus again. So we were talking about there is more than one Pharaoh, which is, I think.
So can you tell us more about Seti II, his baby obelisk and shrines?
Thanks for pointing that out, because Seti II is one of the candidates as the Pharaoh of the Exodus. So we are dealing now with more than one Pharaoh from my perspective. And again, I'm saying on theory. I'm not saying that I'm the one which has have the right approach. So, but I'm just opening another door to understand more things. So we are dealing with three pharaohs from my perspective, because Moses lived for 150 years. So possibly Ramses II is the pharaoh which is Moses. He was born during his time. So possibly Meren Betah is a jealous half brother which is caused problems with Musa, and that's why he decided to travel or fled to Sinai or the land of Midian. And then Seti II, possibly he is the Pharaoh of the Exodus who chased the Israelites. So Seti II, he's a young king, and he died young of unknown reason. Seti II, he left hardly any monuments behind, and the country was in a great political and economical disasters. So, and the proof for that. So hardly any monuments which is left behind. When you go to Karnak, that's another actually images which is I brought with me when you go to Karnak temple. So these images will be like it comes at the end of the collection I brought. So there is a small shrine which is built by him. Once you cross the big pylon, big gate on your left hand side, there is a shrine like more specific, like 3 shrines attached to each other, and 2 baby obelisks. That's what you were talking about. 2 baby obelisks by the entrance of the temple. So, and even his tomb in the Valley of the King is unfinished, and that's a sign. So unfinished tombs, that means that a king died without
preparing himself
for death. And that's why that's another theory that which is could be, and that's actually, by the way, so his wife, she ruled after him, and she married like a person not from Egyptian background, which goes along with the Quran story. That's so his power was given by somebody not from his background. So وَوَرَثْنَاهُمْ قَوْمٌ آخَرُونَ, which is that's going along with the theory. So another interesting thing in this story of the miracles which is Moses used, and we have 2 main miracles, which is that's when his stick, when he turns that into a snake, and that is very well documented in the Bible, in the Quran as well, and also splitting.
So finally, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Samir Abbass, Egyptologist. Thank you for being with us today.
I want to thank you, really. It's been very interesting and very informative, and it was a pleasure having you, sir. It was a pleasure listening to you. Thank you.
And by that, dear viewers, we come to the end of today's edition of the Breakfast Show. I'm Shireen Adel, and I was accompanied by my colleague, Mohammed Abdurrahim. Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you, Shireen, very much.
And see you tomorrow with the new crew.
Goodbye.